Hello. This is a video on T.S. Eliot's later works. I hope you have watched the videos on T.S. Eliot's earlier works as well as on the Wasteland overview. Okay, so first let's talk about Eliot's criticism. In 1920, just before The Wasteland was published, came The Sacred Wood, which is a book of collections of his critical essays, which contained major critical essays like Hamlet and His Problems, Tradition and the Individual Talent. These were published before as well. And Tradition and the Individual Talent rejected romantic individualism in favor of a belief in impersonality of poetry. What is impersonality? We will look at in the next slide. Okay, Homage to John Dryden came in 1924. It contained his essays on Andrew Marvell and the metaphysical poets, who were praised for their unified sensibility. Even that essay was published earlier. In 1928 came for Lancelot Andrewes, essays on style and order. Lancelot Andrewes, essays on style and order. Now let us take a look at, these are collections of essays. Now let us take a look at the important essays themselves. By the way, in this last book, Eliot described himself as classicist in literature, royalist in politics, and Anglo-Catholic in religion. Now, the metaphysical poets, the essay on the metaphysical poets. Remember, the metaphysical poets were poets of the 17th century. And Eliot lived in the 20th century. And Eliot is a modernist writer. The modernist writers have a problem. Their society is very fragmented. The modernist society is very fragmented. There is no unification between the head and the heart. And the solution to this modernist problem, Eliot saw in the metaphysical poets. It is in the metaphysical poets and their unification of sensibility that Eliot found the solution to the modernist malady. He found that the metaphysical poets have a unification of sensibility, or the unification of the head and the heart. After the metaphysical poets like Milton, Dryden, Tennyson, etc., lacked it. A dissociation of sensibility set in after the metaphysical poets, from which the modernists have also never recovered. So the modernists should turn to the metaphysical poets and try to revive unification of sensibility. This is the idea. So in the 17th century, after the metaphysical poets, a dissociation of sensibility set in, from which English poetry has never recovered. You should not have just emotions, you should also have ideas. You should not have just ideas, you should also have emotions. There should be a unification of the head and the heart. Now let us take a look at the term once again in detail. Eliot finds such unification of sensibility in the metaphysical poets and regrets that in the late 17th century, a dissociation of sensibility set in. He finds that the influence of poets like Milton and Dryden has been very harmful. The influence of poets like Milton and Dryden has been harmful. And unification of sensibility is the harmonious working of the head and the heart, or the creative and critical faculties. What is happening here? Creative and critical faculties should be united in a poet. Did you understand? So in Donne and the metaphysical poets, the creative and the critical faculties were united. Eliot is trying to revive unification of sensibility in his poetry also. In The Wasteland, like Donne, Eliot is also trying to write using the head as well as the heart. When he gives very intellectual images, he is trying to evoke emotions regarding the wasteland. Now, let us quote Eliot here. Here is an excerpt. We may express the difference by the following theory. The poets of the 17th century, the successors of the dramatists of the 16th, possessed a mechanism of sensibility which could devour any kind of experience. Any kind of experience they could devour because they possessed a mechanism of sensibility, which is the unified head and the heart. And because of this, everything they could devour. They are simple, at the same time artificial, as well as difficult and fantastic, all at the same time, as their predecessors were, no less, no more than Dante, Guido Cavalcanti, Guinicelli, or Cino. These are all ancient writers. In the 17th century, up to the metaphysical poets, there was the unification of sensibility, like it was there in Dante and these other writers. However, afterwards, in the 17th century, a dissociation of sensibilities set in, from which we have never recovered. And this dissociation, as is natural, was aggravated by the influence of the two most powerful poets of the century, Milton and Dryden. T.S. Eliot finds that the influence of Milton and Dryden has been detrimental, negative. And dissociation of sensibility is the reason for the difference between the intellectual and the reflective poet. Eliot talks about two kinds of poets, the intellectual and the reflective poet. The intellectual poet possessed a mechanism of sensibility which could devour any kind of experience. The intellectual poet had both emotion and reason, creative faculties as well as intellectual faculties and or critical faculties. So that is the intellectual poet. When the dissociation of sensibility occurred, the poets revolted against the ratiocinative, the descriptive. They thought and felt by fits. Unbalanced, they reflected. Reflective poets they become. Now look at an example from Donne. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, the speaker is telling his beloved, though I must go, endure not yet a breach. There will be no break. Even if I go, there will be only an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. He's using an example from, Donne is using an example from chemistry. He is talking about gold being beaten to airy thinness. Gold is malleable. That is a chemical property of gold. And he is using that property to show that emotion. He's using this physical example from chemistry. He is using this intellectual example to show an emotion. That he is so much in love with his beloved, his sweetheart, that there will be no break in their love. This is from Valediction Forbidding Mourning. Now, if they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. He is talking about geometry here. He is talking about compasses that you use in geometry. And using the example of compasses, he is showing emotion. This is also from the same poem. So, in these examples, you can see very intellectual ideas that carry emotion. This is an example for unification of sensibility. Next essay we will quickly look into is Hamlet and His Problems. This is the finest example of Eliot's destructive criticism or iconoclastic criticism. He's taking the greatest poem in the Western literature, in English literature, Hamlet, the greatest play or poem, and he's just breaking it apart. He's saying Hamlet is an artistic failure. Hamlet lacks objective correlative. He says, because the character Hamlet is dominated by an emotion which is inexpressible. Don't try to express your emotions verbally, in words all the time. You will have to say soliloquy after soliloquy, running from pillar to post. Never completely expressing yourself. Instead of that, use a metaphor or a symbol or an objective correlative. Instead of trying to show everything in words, like in imagist poetry, use a concrete symbol, man. Look at Lady Macbeth. Instead of talking about her trauma in words, instead of saying soliloquy after soliloquy like Hamlet, what does Lady Macbeth do? She just takes a taper or candle and walks in her sleep. Wow, what a wonderful way of expression. Because it condenses a load of ideas into that image, that symbol. That is called an objective correlative. We have seen this a lot in mainstream films. In mainstream films, if somebody dies, suddenly the bird will fly out of its cage. Isn't it? If you fall in love, suddenly, or you are going to kiss your beloved, not you, the characters on screen. If a man is going to kiss his girlfriend, suddenly flowers will bloom. The focus will be on the flowers, not on the kiss. That is an objective correlative. So, in mainstream movies, this has been used so much that it has become cliched. But in Eliot's time, it was still new. He uses the term objective correlative that he borrowed from the American painter Washington Allston and says Hamlet lacks an objective correlative and regards Hamlet as an artistic failure. Did you understand? The objective correlative was a term first used by the American painter Washington Allston in 1840. Wow! Like 60 years before T.S. Eliot used it. What is objective correlative? T.S. Eliot defines it as a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula for the poet's emotion. A set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, objects like flowers blooming or a bird flying out of its cage or candle. These objects or situations will be the formula for the poet's emotion. Lover leaves beloved and beloved looks out of the window and cries. But instead of the tears, the focus will be on the rain outside. It is like pathetic fallacy. The rain is the objective correlative for the grief. So, when the objective correlative is shown, it will evoke the poet's emotion. When the external facts are given, the emotion is at once evoked. That is why when I was a small child, I used to watch movies with my mother, Hindi movies, Malayalam movies. And I did not understand much because I was just 3 or 4 years old. What is happening on screen? I did not understand much. And I will see my mother sitting and crying. And I will ask, why are you crying? And I will look at the screen and I will see nothing on the screen but rain. There is a woman looking out at the rain and my mother is crying here because when the rain is shown on TV, it is an objective correlative. When the external fact of rain is shown on TV, the emotion is at once evoked in my mother. Did you understand? Hamlet is an artistic failure because instead of showing rain, Hamlet showed tears. Hamlet is crying. Don't cry. Instead of that, just show rain or some objective correlative. Did you understand? Now, why am I going over this again? Tick, tick. Oh, wait. There was something new here. I told you this already. Wait. Last point. For Cleon Brooks, objective correlative means organic metaphor. So it's like a metaphor. Then tradition and the individual talent. It was first published in 1919 in Times Literary Supplement. Times Literary Supplement. That was where Tradition and the Individual Talent was first published. It was influenced by Henry Bergson and Irving Babbitt. Hey, two philosophers you already know they influenced. Eliot. Irving Babbitt was a new humanist. Henry Bergson was the author of Creative Evolution. Right. Hey, Tradition and the Individual Talent is not like you thought. It is the unofficial manifesto of Eliot's critical creed. It is like the Bible of Eliot's criticism. Unofficial manifesto of Eliot's critical creed. Tradition and the Individual Talent has 3 parts. In the first part, he discusses the concept of tradition. He says, undue stress on individuality shows that the English have an uncritical turn of mind. Why are you focusing on the individuality of the author? The individuality of the author should not be important in the text. The author should not just put his personality or emotions into the text. The author should stand apart from the text. As if he doesn't have anything to do with the text. Let the text speak for itself. Let the text have a life of its own. Why should the author interfere all the time? You know what happened? When I was like 15, 17 years ago, 15 years ago, my son was in play school, and oh, he had to say one speech on the stage on trees. And as soon as he came home, I wrote 5 sentences about trees. I read it out to him. I made him speak it. I prepared him. The speech was mine. The teaching was mine. I got him ready. And then on the day of the speech, I just sent him to school. I was there outside, but I pretended that I'm not really interested. I just stood away. I did not show too much interest, because if I show too much interest, he will get upset. I just said, you go and say your speech. I don't. Actually, my heart is racing. I am so excited. It was like I was on the stage. But I stood away, paring my fingernails, as if I am not interested. And my son went on stage and said the speech. Wow! This is exactly how the author should be. The author should write the text. It is his text. It is his baby. But once the text is written, he should just send it out into the world and stand apart from the text, as if he doesn't care, as if he is not part of it, as if, he has nothing to do with it. Let the text speak for itself. Did you understand? So, undue stress on individuality shows that the English have an uncritical turn of mind. Hey, Eliot says, in the best and most individual part of the modern poets, in the best and the most individual part of the modern poets, the dead poets assert their immortality. Hey, do you know what? My father is a teacher. He was a professor. I am also teaching. I try to develop my own techniques. I try to develop my own style. I don't want to be overshadowed by my father all the time. But I cannot escape it. I don't have to escape his influence. In the best lectures that I give, my father is asserting his immortality. It is my father who is actually shining through my best lectures. Did you understand? In the best and the most individual part of the modern poets, the predecessors, the dead poets, assert their immortality. T.S. Eliot is not trying to avoid influence. In T.S. Eliot, influence is a positive thing. Unlike Harold Bloom, where influence is a negative thing. In Harold Bloom, there is anxiety of influence. Remember? In the Reader Response Critic, or he was also partly a Yale critic, associated with the Yale critics, or at the same time. He was a reader response critic. Harold Bloom. He developed the concept of anxiety of influence. Influence is something that the FEB or the young poet tries to hide through revisionary ratios. He tries to overcome influence. He tries to hide influence through revisionary ratios. But Abhishek Bachchan, if at all Abhishek Bachchan acts an excellent part, it will be Amitabh Bachchan who is asserting his immortality through Abhishek Bachchan's acting. At that moment, the young poet or the modern poet need not try to hide the predecessor's influence. In the best and this is Eliot's idea. In the best and the most individual part of the modern poets, the dead poets assert their immortality. So the dead poets are not dead and gone. The predecessors are not past and gone. They are continuing to assert their influence on the present. The present also influences the past. See, when T.S. Eliot wrote about metaphysical poets, he influenced the image of the metaphysical poets. Until T.S. Eliot wrote about them, metaphysical poets were considered bad poets. After T.S. Eliot wrote about them, we have begun to understand metaphysical poets as great poets. So what does Eliot say? Eliot says that there is a two-way process. Past influences present and present influences the past. Tradition for Eliot implies a recognition of the continuity of literature. The past is still continuing. All my predecessors are there in my teaching. There is my father, there is my grandfather, there is my mother, there is my grandmother. Sometimes when I make videos, I get this feeling, I am speaking exactly like my mother used to teach me in school. The same way I am using language. I am teaching exactly like my father teaches. Sometimes I feel both my parents were teachers. So, tradition implies a recognition of the continuity of literature. You don't have to break with the past. You should recognize that you are part of the past. You're still continuing the past. You're part of that tradition. Tradition implies a critical judgment as to which of the writers of the past continue to be significant in the present. Which of the past writers? See, I have many uncles. I'm a teacher. I have many uncles. One uncle is a doctor. Another uncle is a farmer. Another uncle is a salesman. Another uncle is a teacher. Which of my uncles is my actual predecessor and part of which uncle should I follow? Which uncle forms part of my tradition? My teacher uncle only. I should have a critical, if I have a sense of tradition, I should have a critical judgment as to which of the writers of the past continue to be significant in the present. Which of my uncles are relevant in my present? I should understand critically. Did you understand? So, tradition also implies a knowledge of these significant writers. Eliot knew that in his tradition, there is Donne and the metaphysical poets. Not Milton, Dryden. He rejected their influence. He chose his predecessors. Donne and the metaphysical poets were chosen by Eliot as his predecessors. And he studied them. He acquired a knowledge of these significant writers through painstaking effort. You have to sit down and study. Simply because you are born in England does not mean you are going to be a great English writer. You have to sit down and study them. Your predecessors, learn from them. Did you understand? My mother used to say that in school. Did you understand? See, she is still shining forth through my teaching. And Eliot had a dynamic concept of tradition. Dynamic concept, not a static concept, but a dynamic concept. What do you mean by that? Just as the past directs and guides the present, so the present also alters and modifies the past. Just as the past directs and guides the present. See, the metaphysical poets directs Eliot and the modernists. But Eliot and the modernists are the present. They alter and modify the past. Because of them, our view of the metaphysical poets have changed completely. Just as the past directs and guides the present, the mother directs and guides the child, but the child also changes the mother, right? Are you the same after you have a child? Tell me the truth. Your child is your greatest teacher. I was such a self-centered, fussy, rigid person before I had my son. My son taught me patience. My son made me a good human being because otherwise they will teach you lessons. Children, isn't it? So, just as the mother guides the son or the daughter, the son or daughter also guides the mother, changes the mother. Just as the past directs and guides the present, so the present alters and modifies the past. And to know the tradition, to know what is tradition, the poet must judge critically what are the main trends and what are not. The poet should have a critical judgment. Hey, everything in the past is not part of your tradition. You should critically judge what are the main trends and what are not. Just take what is important, leave the rest. Did you understand? Now, the second part of tradition and the individual talent is about impersonality theory. What is impersonality theory? Hey, the personality of the poet is not important. The most important thing is a sense of tradition. The poet's work should not be great just because the poet puts his personality into it. Some writers, some artists are like that. Writers also, artists also. Let me take the example of two singers. Two singers. I don't know if you will agree with me. I don't know if it is a wrong analogy I'm going to make. But let us take Bhimsen Joshi and Pandit Jasraj. Any day I like Bhimsen Joshi better. Because Pandit Jasraj puts his personality into his singing. When Pandit Jasraj sings, or our Malayali Yeshudas sings, for example, it is Yeshudas that you're hearing. I don't know if you'll understand. There is his ego in it. When Wordsworth writes, Wordsworth's personality, Wordsworth's ego, Wordsworth's experience, Wordsworth is there. But when Shakespeare writes, or when Bhimsen Joshi sings, it is the music that you hear. It is not Bhimsen Joshi. When Shakespeare writes, it is not Shakespeare you see. That is why Shakespeare has negative capability. That is why Wordsworth has egotistical sublime. When the poet is impersonal, you don't see the poet there. When an actor acts, sometimes when an actor acts, you see the actor. I feel that about Amitabh Bachchan. When Amitabh Bachchan acts, you see the great actor Amitabh Bachchan in every role. I don't quite like that. When some actors act, you don't see the actor, you see only the character. There is so much range, there is so much difference in the way they bring out the character that you don't see the actor, you see only the character. Did you understand? So, impersonality is, the personality of the poet is not important. He should not put his personality into the work. The most important thing is his sense of tradition. What is important is not the personality of the poet or the emotions of the poet. And he also says, honest criticism and sensitive appreciation should not be directed upon the poet, but upon poetry. When John Keats writes, why are you talking about Keats? Talk about his poems. You know, after Keats's time, from Keats's time, lots of critics attacked Keats, attacking his personality because he's lower class. When a poet writes, if you are honest in your criticism and sensitive in your appreciation, do not write about the poet or criticize the poet, criticize poetry. Eliot famously compares the mind of a poet to a catalyst. A catalyst, when A and B are taking part in a chemical reaction, in the presence of C, C is a catalyst. Because of C, A and B enter into a chemical reaction. If C is not there, it may not happen. But C should remain aloof. C should not just put himself or itself into the chemical reaction. At the end of the chemical reaction, you should get C entirely as it is. I am thinking of a surgeon performing an operation. A surgeon should remain aloof. He should not give his liver or intestine or heart or whatever to the patient when he performs the surgery. At the end of the surgery, we should get the surgeon as he is. He should remain aloof. He should be like a catalyst. Without the surgeon, surgery is not possible. But after the surgery, the surgeon should remain as he is. Did you understand? It compares the mind of a poet to a catalyst. The poet should write poetry, but should not put a little bit of himself into the poetry. The poetry should not contain traces of the poet. Writing poetry is like a chemical reaction. And the poet is like a catalyst. He compares the poet's mind to a jar or receptacle where numberless feelings and emotions are stored. You take you take sugar in a glass jar. After the sugar is over, after you use up all the sugar, the glass jar will remain. Like that, the glass jar should not put a little bit of itself into the sugar. The poet's mind should be like a jar or receptacle in which numberless feelings and emotions are stored. Poetry is inspiration. The greatness of the poem lies in the intensity of the process of poetic composition. The greatness of the poem lies in the intensity of the process of poetic composition. Hey, I'm going to make sambar. Which sambar do you like? Is it lady's finger sambar or drumstick sambar? Answer is, whichever ingredients you use, it's okay. The sambar should be good. Whether you use lady's finger or drumstick, that is no guarantee that the sambar will be good. Did you understand? What is important is not the ingredients, but the process of poetic composition. Poetry, says Eliot, is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. Do not just put all your emotion into poetry and think it will be great poetry. Poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not an expression of personality, but an escape from personality. And the last part of the essay concludes this discussion. So that's about tradition and the individual talent in a nutshell. Then Eliot also wrote The Function of Criticism, 1923. It's a reply to the romantic critic Middleton Murray, who critiqued Eliot's romanticism and tradition. Middleton Murray critiqued Eliot's romanticism and tradition. And Eliot continues his argument in Tradition and the Individual Talent. Criticism, he says here, is not an autotelic activity. Autotelic means independent. Criticism is based on creativity. Criticism is based on literature. It is not independent and autonomous. What is the end of criticism or the aim of criticism? Eliot famously says that the aim of criticism is elucidation of works of art and the correction of taste. Remember, in Eliot's time, in the time of modernists and new critics, taste is a very important idea. To teach people what is best literature, that is what the critics undertook to do. What is tradition? What are the canon? What are the canonical works? What are the greatest works? Critics showed readers. That is why F.R. Lewis wrote The Great Tradition. And Eliot is saying the function of criticism is the elucidation of works of art and the correction of taste. Who is an ideal critic? An ideal critic must be entirely impersonal and objective. Don't be prejudiced. Don't read a book from your subjective point of view. Be objective. Aristotle is a perfect critic. A perfect critic should not be a victim of his own emotions. He must have a highly developed sense of facts. He should have knowledge of the technical details of a poem. He must have developed a sense of tradition. He must have a highly developed sense of tradition. The critic and the creative artist must be the same person. The critic and the creative artist must be the same person. Means what? The critic should have creative abilities also. The critic should not only be a critic, he should also be an artist. Then, he must be an expert in the use of tools of comparison and contrast. The critic should have excellent use of the tools of comparison and contrast and also analysis. And finally, he must not try to judge the present by the standards of the past. Arey, what is this, Kalyani? Ayyo. I will show you how I edit. Tick, 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 tick. Did you like that? All right. Now once again, it will begin from the beginning. Ding, 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 ding. Gum, 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 gum. Yeah. Ayyo. Let us read like this. Where is it? A critic must not try to judge the present by the standards of the past. Do not think just because in the past people did not do something, that doesn't mean you should criticize it. A critic should not judge by the standards of the past all the time. He must be prepared to correct and revise his views from time to time in the light of new facts, because things are changing. Everything is not staying the same forever. So, Eliot says a critic should be ready to change his ideas according to changes in the present. And the function of a critic is to elucidate works of art, elucidation of works of art and the correction of taste. We have seen that before. Correction of taste means correct and educate people. What is happening? The idea of Eliot regarding criticism is that criticism should elucidate works of art and correct taste and educate the people, teach them what is good taste. There should be a common pursuit of true judgment. And a critic should promote the enjoyment and understanding of works of art. A critic should be like a tourist guide or something. A critic should show people what are the best texts, promote an enjoyment and understanding of the texts, of these texts, the best texts. He should place before the readers the relevant facts about the poem. The critic should help the readers to understand the great works. He should place before the readers the relevant facts about a poem. He should highlight the impersonal nature and thus promote correct understanding. A critic should be like a tourist guide. That I am saying, Eliot didn't say. A critic should shift, combine, connect, expunge, and thus impart perfection and finish to what has been created. The artist will create, in other words, the critic is like an assistant to the artist. The artist has created something and the critic is the one who is providing finish to it. And a critic must find common principles for the pursuit of criticism. He should establish criticism as a scientific activity. He should find common principles for the pursuit of criticism. And a critic should not pass judgment. A critic should not just pass judgment. He should let the readers decide. He should not just tell the readers, like a tourist guide should not tell the tourist, don't go there, you should only go here. Like that, a tourist guide should not pass judgment. He should let the travelers decide where they want to go. Did you understand? A critic should not pass judgment unnecessarily. And a critic should not just force the readers to read something and not other things. A critic should just place similar facts before the readers and help them to form their own judgment. This is what a teacher should also do. A teacher should also be objective and help students to arrive at conclusions by themselves. Eliot's conception of a critic and his functions are classical. Now, Eliot's religious poetry. Eliot joined the Church of England in 1927. That is also the year in which he became a British citizen. Poems 1909 to 25, which includes the Hollow Men. Then collected poems. Another collection came in 1936, which includes the Journey of the Magi and Ash Wednesday. You have to talk about all that. Then the Journey of the Magi and Marina are both part of Ariel poems. It is called Ariel poems. There are 4 Ariel poems, or the first 3 Ariel poems are about religion, and the last Ariel poem, Marina, is based on Pericles. Who's Pericles? Shakespeare's Pericles. Now, 4 quartets came in 1943. So much Christian poetry he has written. Even though he talks about Hinduism a little bit in The Wasteland, majority of Eliot's poems are about Christianity. 4 quartets has a title suggesting chamber music played by 4 poets. Burnt, Norton, East, Coker, Dry Salvages, Little Gidding, Bedl. That is how Eliot organized them. Burnt, Norton, East, Coker, Dry Salvages, Little Gidding. Burnt, Norton, 1935, East Coker 40, Dry Salvages 41, Little Gidding 42. We will talk about all these presently. And then in 1963, before he died, there was another collected poems. First, let us talk about 1925 poem, The Hollow Men. I have already told you in the Wasteland video that, like the Wasteland, this work was also built up from a number of separate poems. A group of poems edited into one book. That is how he wrote this. He got this title, The Hollow Men, by combining The Hollow Land, a romance by William Morris, the pre-Raphaelite poet, and The Broken Men, a poem by Rudyard Kipling. The Hollow Land is a poem by William Morris, pre-Raphaelite poet. The Broken Men is a poem by Rudyard Kipling. He combined these titles and got Hollow Men. And hollow men, the phrase, is also used by Shakespeare. Brutus in Julius Caesar is using this phrase. And because they are so deceitful, his companions like Cassius. Then hollow men is further connected with other literary works in the epigraph. This is a poem in 5 parts about emptiness or incompleteness. Emptiness or incompleteness. As I told you, it has 2 epigraphs. One from Heart of Darkness. Mr. Kurtz, he dead. That is how the messenger boy announces Kurtz's death in Heart of Darkness. And then there is another epigraph referring to Guy Fawkes Day. Guy Fawkes Day is a day when an effigy or like a scarecrow, man is made and burst with firecrackers. That effigy of the man, Guy Fawkes, is also hollow man. So Mr. Kurtz is a hollow man. Guy Fawkes is a hollow man. A penny for the old guy. That is the traditional children's quest for a penny. They go from house to house saying a penny for the old guy and collect a penny from people. This is what happens on Guy Fawkes Day. So these 2 are the epigraphs of the hollow men, both referring to different kinds of hollowness. Heart of Darkness had a deep impact on Eliot because Eliot thought that Heart of Darkness is a great achievement on the treatment of evil. And you also know how it comments on colonialism, that novel. The horror, these are the last words that he had said, Kurtz had said when he died. And Eliot, if you remember, I had told you before, had planned to use the horror as an epigraph to the Wasteland. And then both epigraphs relate to light and darkness, and Kurtz and the effigy of Guy Fawkes are hollow men. The concept of hollow men is an objective correlative for the malady or disease or malaise of the post-World War I Europe. In this poem, there is a direct treatment of the, like in the Wasteland, a treatment of the depressive reality of the post-World War I Europe. At this time, Eliot also was undergoing a depressive phase in his life. Part 1 of The Hollow Men deals with the hopeless state of the people in the post-World War Europe. In part 2, one of the hollow men is speaking actually. In part 3, the dead land or the wasteland, the desert waste of the hollow men is described. In part 4, how it is described how these lost lives have no blessed vision to depend on. And part 5 also offers another desperate vision. So this is a very bleak poem that you have here, The Hollow Men. The Journey of the Magi, I already told you, it is one of the aerial poems. The Journey of the Magi, remember there were 3 kings who visited Christ, the Magi or the 3 kings. In this poem, which was published as one of the aerial poems, we have one of the Magi speaking, one of the kings speaking. This poem was written after a period of spiritual crisis, and as well as immediately after Eliot's conversion to the Anglican Church or the Church of England. That was in June 1927. One of the Persian kings who came to visit the infant Christ recollects the experience many years later from his home country. He recalls their hard journey the cold of the winter time, because it was December, and other difficulties that they met along their route to meet Christ, finally reaching their destination. And he describes not the, happy meeting with the Christ, but actually he describes the saddening or the traumatic result of having witnessed the great birth. Because after he returns home, he feels sadness. In three parts, the poem describes the arduous desert journey of the Magi to Judea, the meeting of the infant not a moment too soon, and the meaning of this meeting, which relates to the Magus's reflections on birth and death as an awareness of his own death. He is not able to adjust with his past life. This is also a monologue, and it shows how difficult it is for him to live after having met Christ. He feels alienated from his own people, who are holding on to their heathen gods, and he is experiencing that the journey is not yet over. So that is about the Magi, and it is a very deeply religious poem. Then next poem we have to talk about is Ash Wednesday, written in 1927. This was also a poem published after Eliot's conversion to the Church of England, and the title refers to the first day of Lent during the Easter season. When people go to church and put ash crosses on their foreheads. So this is a moment that marks their turning away from sin towards godliness, preceding the Easter celebration of Christ's resurrection. And the poem is based on Dante's Purgatorio, the second section of Dante's Divine Comedy. And because it's about Eliot's conversion, it is also called a conversion poem. This poem is in 6 parts and narrates the story of Eliot's conversion to Anglicanism in a symbolist dream. It represents the conflict between the flesh and the spirit. It is the whole story is that of a convert. The whole poem is about a convert, and not necessarily Eliot, just any convert. And the tone of the poem is that of penitence. There is humility near despair and hope that is appropriate to the season of Lent. Herbert Palmer has written a parody of it called Cinder Thursday. Next, we have a group of other religious poems. They are also very profoundly related to history and religion. That is the 4 quartets. The 4 quartets came in 1943 together. The title suggests chamber music played by 4 poets, and it is written in a simple, more direct style. The poems of the 4 quartets are written in a simple, direct style compared to his early work, and it is considered the masterpiece of his later career. The 4 quartets is considered the masterpiece of his later career. First is Burnt Norton. Burnt Norton, 1935. It was written along with Murder in the Cathedral, to which it is thematically linked, because both these are about themes of time and salvation. Remember, Murder in the Cathedral is also from 1935. The opening lines are very famous. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future. And time future contained in time past. Will you remember these lines? If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. Remember, in The Wasteland and many of his poems, time is a very important concern for Eliot. And also this past and present are not two separate things. Past, present and future form a continuum. This is also an idea that you see in several places in Eliot. The wasteland, tradition and the individual talent. This is the very core of modernism. The continuity of time. Time as a continuum or a matrix. Now, East Coker, the title refers to a village in Somerset in England. If you remember, I have told you, in the 17th century, Eliot's ancestors came from Somerset to the US. And Eliot's ashes, when he died, were also interred there in East Coker. The major motifs are Mary, the Mother of God, and the element of water, like in the wasteland, water. And it opens with the famous line, "In the beginning is my end." The Dry Salvages is a title that refers to a group of rocks off the Cape Ann coast. A group of rocks off the Cape Ann coast. It reflects Eliot's early life in the United States. It is more explicitly religious than the first two parts, Dry Salvages, more than Burnt Norton and East Coker. Dry Salvages is religious explicitly and directly refers to the Annunciation, that is the announcement about the coming of Christ to Mary. Annunciation is the announcement about the coming of Christ. You have the same thing happening in Krishna myth also. Little Gidding is perhaps the most famous of all these. What is this? East Coker I have given here. It is the most famous poem in the sequence. The title Little Gidding refers to a small Anglican community of the 17th century. This community is an objective correlative for spirituality and timelessness. They represent spirituality and timelessness, where again you see unity of past, present and future. The motifs of fire that purifies and the Holy Ghost can be seen here. Famous line in Little Gidding is, "To purify the dialect of a tribe." That is a famous line from Little Gidding. To purify the dialect of a tribe. Various kinds of linguistic purification was the agenda of modernism, remember. Purification, especially linguistic purification, it happened in Imagism. Imagism deprived or took away from language all the unnecessary elements. James Joyce also did that. Stream of consciousness also did that. So various kinds of linguistic purification, remember, was the agenda of modernism. Eliot has written more prose. Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats is not prose. It's a collection of humorous verse for children, where there is a poem, Macavity, the Mystery Cat. And Cultural Problems absorbed much of Eliot's energies as a critic after he joined the church. He wrote a lot about cultural problems. His prose during this period showed fascination for authority and control in life and literature. He was fascinated by authority and control. And works of this time, prose works of this time are The Idea of a Christian University, Notes Towards a Definition of Culture, On Poetry and Poets, To Criticize the Critic, etc. Next, we'll talk about Eliot's poetic drama. Eliot's attempts to revive verse drama were significant. At this time, W.B. Yeats, Christopher Fry, etc. were also writing verse drama. Eliot's verse plays include Sweeney Agonistes, fragments of an Aristophanic melodrama, that is the subtitle. Sweeney Agonistes, fragments of an Aristophanic melodrama. He also wrote the pageant play The Rock. Murder in the Cathedral came in 1935. It has a Yeatsian spiritual vigor and dramatic crispness that blend with historicism. A spiritual vigor and a dramatic crispness. Less successful were the poetic plays that came after this. Some of them are prescribed in universities though. Family Reunion, 1939. The Cocktail Party, 1950. Then The Confidential Clerk, 54, and The Elder Statesman, 1959. There is also a pageant play called The Rock, a very religious pageant play is there called The Rock. Sweeney Agonistus came in 1933. Sweeney Agonistus, subtitled Fragments of an Aristophanic Melodrama, as I told you. It was the first verse play of Eliot, and it expresses Eliot's spiritual anguish in the modern age. The title character Sweeney is an ape-like character. I already mentioned this in the context of Sweeney Among the Nightingales, an early poem. He is a working class buffoon, and the character Sweeney appeared in 4 poems prior to this. In Sweeney Among the Nightingales, Mr. Eliot's Sunday Morning Service, Sweeney Erect, and The Wasteland. Now, Murder in the Cathedral. It was composed for the Canterbury Festival of 1935 at the request of George Bell, Bishop of Chichester. I will be making a video on Murder in the Cathedral in detail, but this is just an overview. Murder in the Cathedral was composed for the Canterbury Festival of 1935 at the request of the Bishop of Chichester. Eliot drew heavily on the writing of Edward Grimm, a clerk who was an eyewitness to the event in the 12th century. Grimm recounted the experience in his book Vita est Thomé. Vita means life. Life of Thomas Becket, that is the meaning. Published in about 1180. Remember, the year before he was dead, killed. The first performance of Murder in the Cathedral was given on 15th June 1935 in the chapter house of Canterbury Cathedral. Robert Speight played the part of Becket. Sometimes for the major plays of English literature, who are the people who did the role for the first time, which publisher, which production company, questions like that can be expected in exams. Now let us take a quick look at the historical context of the play. Remember the Plantagenet England. The Plantagenet dynasty was founded by King Henry II. King Henry II had a dispute with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, over several issues, including the relations between the church and the state. Over several issues, Thomas Becket and King Henry II disagreed. And King Henry was very upset with Thomas Becket, and one day he is said to have spoken aloud, "Oh, if only somebody would get rid of this man for me." And 4 knights went and killed Thomas Becket, it seems. Henry said that he did not give the orders to kill the archbishop. The 4 knights, they appear in the play also. Reginald Fitzurse, Hugh de Morville, William de Tracy, Richard Le Breton. These are the 4 knights. And the play portrays the assassination of Archbishop Thomas Becket in 1170. Not the previous year, 10 years before. What am I saying? Here, I said Edward Grimm published it in about 1180. And I said previous year he was killed. I was wrong. It was in 1170 that he was killed. Thomas Becket was killed 10 years before that book. Okay. The action occurs between 2nd and 29 December. The action occurs between 2nd December and 29 December. In between, Christmas comes in the year 1170, chronicling the days leading up to the martyrdom of Thomas Becket. And the play is written in 2 parts. Let us take a look at part 1. In part 1, you see Archbishop's Hall in Canterbury. The date is 2nd December 1170. When the play begins, a chorus comprised of the women of Canterbury huddle outside the cathedral and express their anxiety over an impending disaster. 3 priests enter and briefly discuss a major issue of the play. 3 priests are entering. So there are women who form the chorus, also 3 priests. They discuss the differences between temporal and spiritual power. They discuss a major issue, that is the differences between temporal power and spiritual power. A messenger then arrives. First chorus, then 3 priests, then a messenger. And he informs them that their Archbishop Thomas Becket is returning to England after a 7-year absence. Thomas Becket is coming back to England. This news arrives. And The chorus expresses its terror at the thought of Thomas's return. The chorus is upset that Thomas is returning because the chorus knows that something bad will happen. And Thomas is visited by 4 tempters. Without Thomas's acceptance of it, he cannot be martyred. He cannot be killed. Thomas has to accept it. And the tempters are trying to tempt Thomas to accept his death or martyrdom. The first tempter offers Thomas the glory of his past friendship with the king. The first tempter offers the glory of his past friendship. The second tempter offers political power. This is almost like the tempting of Christ in the wilderness. The third tempter offers him freedom. And all these 3 temptations Becket is able to reject. They are dismissed by Thomas. And the fourth tempter tempts him with martyrdom. So, if Thomas is not ready to give up the church for or his beliefs for past friendship with the king, he is not ready to give up his beliefs for political power, he is not ready to give up his beliefs for freedom, but he is ready to die for martyrdom. And then there is an interlude in the play. This short scene or interlude depicts Thomas's sermon in the cathedral on Christmas morning. Remember, this was 2nd December. Now it is 25th December, 1170. Then we have part 2 after the interlude. 4 days have passed since Thomas's sermon. That is, it is December 29. And where is Thomas? The chorus is still fearful and awaiting a sign from God in the form of a cleansing spring. The chorus is sure that something will happen. And Thomas is inside the hall. 4 knights enter Archbishop's hall. There are 3 priests there. They tell the priest that they have urgent business from the king, and the priests are sent out. The knights charge Thomas with being in revolt against the king. The knights accuse Thomas for revolting against the king. After this, they level other charges also and demand that he absolve those bishops who had been previously excommunicated. Some bishops had been excommunicated by Thomas, and the knights ask him to absolve them or take back these bishops to the church. The scene then shifts inside the cathedral. Becket rejects the knights' demand and they kill him. The knights now kill Thomas Becket. The themes of the play are martyrdom. Eliot tries to show that a martyr is born as per the will of God. A martyr is born. You don't become a martyr. From the time you are born, it is clear you are going to be a martyr. Another theme is temptation. Like in Milton, life is filled with temptations. And as a poetic drama also, it is important to look at this play. It's a verse form. Eliot believed that the verse form is the best form for drama, and the verse form is suitable for this theme especially. Poetic drama can aptly express inner struggles of characters. That is what Eliot thought. The meter used in the play follows the model of Everyman. Remember the morality play of the 15th century, Everyman? That play is the model. Now, let us take a quick look at the other plays. Family Reunion. It's a detective play in 2 acts. The Family Reunion is a detective play in 2 acts. Remember that? Written in blank verse. And it was first performed in 1939. It's a modern version of the Orestes story. The story is Harry Lord Monchensi returns to his house Wishwood, and he is thinking that he has killed his manic depressive wife. He's obsessed with the idea that he has killed his wife because his wife was emotionally destroying him. But he eventually learns that it was not he who killed his wife. It was his father, not he, who plotted to escape from an oppressive marriage through murder. And Harry embraces the guilt he has thus inherited. Even though he wanted to kill his wife, he did not directly kill. It was his father. But he has inherited that guilt from his father. Because, like Ibsen said, the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children. Ibsen said that in Ghosts. and Harry leaves to become a missionary. In family reunion, because of the murder of a close relative, there are the blood furies that appear from Orestia. Orestia by Aeschylus also presents blood furies. Here also there is the appearance of the furies. Harry's uncles and aunts intermittently transform into a chorus, commenting fearfully on the action in Aeschylean mode, like in Aeschylus. Harry is an amalgam of Orestes and Hamlet. Now the cocktail party. It is again a verse play and modelled on Euripides, Heracles or Hercules in the play Acestus by Euripides. That is the model. It begins and ends in a London cocktail party. That is why the title, The Cocktail Party. It begins and ends in London in a cocktail party. The play traces the spiritual transformation of a separated couple, Edward and Lavinia Chamberlain. And Edward has a mistress, Celia Copleston. The play traces the spiritual transformation of these characters. Did you understand? And Edward and Lavinia Chamberlain are separated after 5 years of marriage. The uninvited guest in the party is an eminent psychiatrist, Sir Henry Harcourt Raleigh. He unites the separated husband and wife. Celia, the mistress, under the psychiatrist's urging, also moves on towards a life of greater honesty and salvation and becomes a Christian martyr in Africa. 2 years later, Edward and Lavinia again meet. Now they are better adjusted. They host another, again we meet them in another cocktail party that they are hosting. The play Cocktail Party is notable for its apparently secular character. It is not directly a religious play, beneath the surface of which there are moral and religious dimensions. Its verse effectively suggests the patterns and rhythms of speech. The Confidential Clerk, published in 1954, is a comic verse play. All these plays have a comic element. Sir Claude Mulhammer is a wealthy entrepreneur. He smuggles his illegitimate son Colby into the household by employing him as his confidential clerk. He hopes that his wife, Lady Elizabeth Mulhammer, will like the boy and allow him to live as her adopted son. And a drama of mistaken identity and confusion follows. The confidential clerk in the title refers to both Colby, this illegitimate son, as well as Egerton, Sir Claude's old clerk. The Elder Statesman is a play in verse. Lord Claverton is the main character. He is a man of distinction, well respected in society. He has had a bad past which he does not want to remember. If you noticed, all these plays, like the plays of Oscar Wilde, were about the bad past of the characters. The upper class characters are having some things to hide in their past. That is what all these plays were about. He fears that his bad past will make his children hate him. Towards the end of his life, two figures from his past, Gomez and Mrs. Cargill, visit him, whom Lord Claverton. Their presence symbolizes the guilt that haunts Claverton. At the end of the play, Claverton confesses everything to his daughter, Monica. Monica acts as a spiritual guide to her father. After the confession, Claverton goes for a walk and dies off stage. I hope you have been writing down all this and studying. These are all very important authors I'm dealing with. Do some research on your own as well. Now, Eliot's views on poetic drama. Eliot reacted against the drama of ideas popularized by Galsworthy, G.B. Shaw, etc. All the modernists were against Galsworthy, Arnold Bennett, G.B. Shaw, etc. The modernists explored the mind and mythology, while Galsworthy, G.B. Shaw, etc. Talked about social reality. Eliot believed that poetry and drama are inseparable from each other. Poetry and drama should not be separated. Poetic drama, according to Eliot, has far-reaching effects. As it affects emotions directly, poetic drama must have emotional unity, he believed. Poetic drama should be closer to the natural rhythms of speech. And poetry should be a medium to look at, not to look through. He believed that poetry should be a medium to look at, not to look through. That means poetry should not be the end. Poetry should be the end, not the medium. What can I say? I will explain with The Wasteland. The Wasteland, the poem, is the end. The Wasteland is not actually just like a window showing you Europe. The Wasteland by itself is an end in itself. Is that clear? Poetry is not just a reflection of reality. Poetry is independent. Poetry itself is important. It is not just something you look through. It is something to look at. Clear? So, thanks for watching this video.